It's time for the Margin Matters Minute with Money Man Jason Brown.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm so excited to welcome a special guest author today. His name is Deacon Hayes. Deacon is the founder of wellkeptwallet.com, a personal finance site dedicated to helping people make money, save money, and pay off debt. Now, Deacon has also been a contributor for the U.S. News and World Report, Investopedia, Clark Howard, and more. Now, today, I'm so excited to have Deacon on to share about his book, You Can Retire Early, Everything You Need to Achieve Financial Independence When You Want It. Deacon, thanks so much for joining me today and sharing more about your book.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this. Now, one of the themes that I do on my channel is retirement talks. So you wrote a book about retiring, specifically retiring early. So I definitely wanted to talk to you and get some of your thoughts on this, because to me, retirement is a myth. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, Deacon, I don't know if you've seen this, but not too long ago, Netflix came out with a documentary series that covered all things money. And it's actually called Money Explained. It's a documentary series. There's different episodes that cover different things like credit cards and debt and stuff. Now, one of the episodes of the documentary specifically covered retirement. Now, I want to I'm going to tell you this thing was very gloom and doom. I watched this and I was like, okay, well, I got no chance. So I want to throw some of these statistics at you in case you haven't seen the documentary, and just kind of have you share some of your thoughts and feedback on it. So some of these statistics they put out there, and we've probably seen these in media reports as well. So they say 25% of Americans do not have any money for retirement, $0. 92% of Americans are not meeting their retirement savings target. Most of us will never be able to save $1 million to retire. The biggest fear that people have is outliving their money. More people are living longer, and that there's that problem. Now, the last one I have is 35% of millionaires say it's going to take a miracle to be ready for retirement in this economic climate. So what do you have to say on, we get hit with all this negative kind of statistics, and I don't know how much of that's true or fabricated or whatnot, but it seems like now that we live in this inflationary post-pandemic world, this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing. People like my dad's generation were probably told, hey, you just need $1 million to save to retire, and you can live off 4% interest a year or whatever the returns are, and now you're hearing like that number's way higher. So what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one thing I never like to do is kind of compare myself to others, right? And so I think it's important that people say, yes, I think a lot of that is true, right? And the fact that people don't have the resources, but it's not because of external factors. It's typically because of internal factors. It's the lack of saying no to things, right? And so for me, like we were those people, right? We had more debt than we had money. We had more going out than we had coming in. And we had to make a switch in our brain that said, hey, no, I want to live differently, which means I have to make sacrifices so that I can have the future things that I want. And so what that could be is, hey, we cut our internet bill from $150 a month to $19.99 a month because we're like, we don't need that high speed of an internet at that time when we're paying off our debt. But then we had an extra $100 a month, right? For just that one decision. So what I see is, yes, that's true. But I think that the hope is that there's people listening to this that could say, hey, if I make different choices, I could have different results than what the statistics say. And I have this example that I use where if people were to put $100 away every 2 weeks for 45 years, they'd have $1.1 million at an 8% return, 8%. Right? Most people use 10%. I'm like, hey, I want to be a little bit more conservative. Let's say 8%. I mean, you can get 4% on a savings account right now. So 8% seems very doable. So anybody, if you're 20 years old and listening to this, you could be a millionaire by the time your retirement age. Now people might say, I'm not 20 years old. I'm 40 years old. I'm 50 years old, right? So those will be different, right? It's going to change the way that people save. But to answer your question, yes, I do see those statistics as real. Like 25% of people don't have, what they need to retire or anything. and then the majority don't have enough. And so I think we can change that by doing what you're doing with your podcast and what I'm doing, through the book, to try to help people realize there is hope and there is a possibility to achieve those goals.
That's great, man. So well said. Now let's back up a little bit. When we talk about this book, let's just kind of what inspired you to write this book? Why was this book so important for you to put together and get out there?
Well, I think one of the biggest human desires we have is freedom, right? Freedom of choice, freedom of religion, freedom to have resources and do what we want, freedom of time. And so retiring, I think, to a lot of people provides freedom. My definition is more, do you have the financial freedom, the financial resources to live life the way you want to live and not be dictated by a W-2 employer, right? And so that's where the book comes in. It says, hey, here are some real paths that you can take to retire early, in the sense of having enough financial independence that you don't have to be dictated by an employer when you can retire, when to clock in, when to clock out. And so it's less about being like, hey, I'm going to go just to a beach and sip on Mai Tais. And it's more about, no, I've planned in such a way that I have the financial resources that if I want to do something different with my life, I can. Maybe you want to start a nonprofit. Maybe you want to travel with your family around the world. Maybe you want to start your own business, whatever it might be. You put yourself in a position where you can do that by making different choices.
So well said, man. Really good. Now there's so much great content in this book, and you did such a great job putting this book together. But this might be hard for you to answer. What would you say is the most important element or aspect or topic of the book? And it doesn't, maybe narrow it down to one or two. What are some of the most important topics that you covered in the book?
Well, so the first thing I'm going to say is discover your why, right? Like, why do you want to retire? And that is, you have to retire towards something, not away from something, right? A lot of people are like, I want to get away from my 9 to 5. That's why they want to retire. Well, the problem is you do that and you get to the end and then you feel empty inside because you're like, I don't know what to do with my time, right? You think, oh, I'm going to golf. Well, golf will get boring. I promise you. You could say, I want to go on vacation. You're like, okay, well, it's great for a few days, but then it kind of wears off, right? Like, the idea is you want to have kind of this why, and that why, I want to spend more time with my family. I want to start that business, the things we kind of talked about earlier. So that's the number one thing. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is I kind of laid out different paths, right? There are different paths to financial freedom. And the three main paths are the stock market, real estate, and starting your own business, right? So you kind of determine for yourself which is the best path for you. If you're more of an idea person and you want to come up with a business and you want to be an entrepreneur, then go down that route. If you're more, hey, I'm more comfortable having like brick and mortar, like actual assets that I hold on to, like real estate. So that you're getting rent every month, and that if they don't have a renter, at least you could sell a property. Like real estate could be an option. And then if you're like the passive person, it's like, I don't want to do anything, right? That's where the stock market comes in, right? It's dividends, it's investing in stuff that long term is going to have a good track record, like index funds. And so that's really the two main things: discover your why, and then pick a path.
Now, when you're talking about discover your why, what I was thinking about was, I don't know if you've heard this saying, you probably have, but people have said to me, when you talk about retirement, they'll say, everybody knows what they're retiring from, but most people don't know what they're retiring to, right? This is kind of what you're talking about with the why. So I thought about my dad. My dad actually recently just retired. And his joke, he would always joke, he's like, I'm not retiring from my job or my company. I'm retiring from Atlanta traffic. He would always joke because the commute was so bad. He worked in downtown. He says, I'm retiring from Atlanta traffic. But then he would never really say like, okay, well, what are you going to do, Dad, once you retire? Like, are you going to travel? I would ask these questions to him. I was like, are you going to travel? Are you going to, buy a beach house? Like, what is your dream? What is your, vision? He doesn't play golf. He doesn't do, he's not really a sports guy, but he never really had a response. He's just like, I'm just going to do nothing. I'm like, well, what do you, that's kind of what you're talking about. Like, you're going to get bored after 2 weeks. So that's what I think a lot of people might not, have a plan for, right? Is that what you see?
For sure. So I've got a great example. I had these lava rocks in my backyard, and we were having our first kid, and then I just thought, hey, these are dangerous. They're really sharp. They're everywhere. I'm like, I'm going to give them away on Craigslist. So I put them up there, and this guy says, hey, I'll come pick them up. I'll bring my truck. I'm like, okay. So he comes, and he's like 74 years old.
Okay.
And I'm like, and he's got like a wheelbarrow and like gloves. He's ready to go. And so I'm like helping him load the rocks. And he's like, so what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm an author. I wrote this book, you know, you can retire early. And he's like, oh, I did that once. So 74-year-old guy, right? And I'm like, so what happened? He said, well, I had a heart attack. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I sat on the couch, I watched TV, I ate junk food, and then eventually my health got bad. And he was a physically active guy. Like looking at him, I'd be like, you look like you're a fit person. But he said that like he was a general contractor, a builder, and that's what he knew how to do. And then once he retired, he had nothing to do, right? So he just sat and he ate and he got a heart attack. So I asked him, so how did you react to that? He said, I went back to work. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, I just do small projects here and there, but I'm active, I'm happy. And it's funny because people think that like the retirement is the end all be all. But then what, like you said, a lot of people get there and they're like, I don't have a destination. Now I'm just kind of aimlessly wandering without purpose. And so that's what he found is like, hey, I actually like to do stuff with my hands. Like I'm going to do projects around the house. That he was redoing his landscaping, and that's why he's getting the lava rocks, you know? So I think it's really important that people have that why and understand what they're retiring to.
Now Deacon, this is a perfect transition to my next question. And we're going to touch a little bit on this. I want to get some of your feedback on this whole FIRE movement that I don't understand. It's the FIRE movement, in case you guys don't know, it's an acronym, stands for Financially Independent, Retire Early. It's a big kind of cult movement, I guess, in the personal financial field. Now I'm going to read a segment out of your book here. If anyone has the book they want to follow at home, chapter 10, page 229. This paragraph really, really hit me. And you're talking about the header is what they don't tell you about early retirement. And when I read this, I thought about the FIRE movement, and I want you to touch on this in a second. So what you wrote in the first graph was retiring early can have a downside that very few financially independent people talk about: lack of purpose. This is possibly the most important part of this book. You begin reading thinking you have the answer to a happy life, and that answer is financial independence and the ability to retire early. Then when you get there, you're completely bored and totally let down, which is kind of what you were just sharing that example. But so when I read that, I started thinking about the FIRE movement. And, you know, of course, I understand the concept that, you know, nobody wants to work. Everybody wants to be financially free, financially independent. I understand that. I get it. You know, most people hate their jobs. I get it. But then what I don't get is like, you see all these media stories about these people that, you know, hey, I worked, you know, 100 hours a week and I saved 90% of my income and I retired at 35 years old. You can find so many of these stories in the media about people doing this. And then I start thinking about, you know, hey, you know, I'd love to see follow-up stories on like what that 35-year-old's doing at 40, at 45, at 50. Like, I would be curious to know, like that's what they don't tell you, right? So what, I mean, kind of help me understand, Deacon, like help me understand the FIRE movement a little bit, and help me understand, like, what are these people doing, like when they're retiring at 35 and 40 years old? Like what exactly are they doing with the rest of their lives?
Well, I think the first part of it is what causes this, right? And what I would say is the Atlanta traffic, right? The working long hours, not having control over your you know, your time. So like you can't go to your kids' games, you can't go on a certain vacation you want to go on because you have to be at work at a certain time, right? So I think that there's a lot of reasons that people are like, I desire financial dependence and to retire early because of all of these things, right? But to your point, I think what happens is people get there, and there are stories, and you know, I don't have specifics of like what they're doing, but you could take Mindy Jensen, you know, from 1500 Days, and how she works for Bigger Pockets now, but she's retired. You know, it's kind of like, but now she likes working with people and has a podcast, and so has found kind of the next chapter, right? And I think that the challenge is that it's less about the FIRE movement and more about people that are in the FIRE movement having that why and it being clear of like, where are they going to? And I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't have that. They're just like, hey, I have this fun goal of I want to save 90% of my income so that I can retire early. And then you do it and you're like, okay, now what do I do with my day? Right? Where do I spend my time? And I think that's a huge challenge and a gap in kind of the FIRE movement. But I think there's a lot of people out there addressing it. And, I hope that I'm just one voice to help kind of say, hey, this is a part you really need to focus on during that process.
That's good, man. Real well said. Now let's, as we wrap up here with Mr. Deacon Hayes, author of You Can Retire Early, a tremendous book. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Now we're going to use myself as an example in this situation. So a couple years ago, I turned 45. And I had this kind of anxiety, panic meltdown because I realized I started working the day I turned 15. I was bagging groceries at Kroger. That was my first job. So the day I turned 15, I started legally working. And then when I hit 45, I kind of had this like reflective moment of, hey, I've been working for 30 years. And I kind of felt like I was at the halfway point. I was like, am I really going to have to work another 30 years? Now, Deacon, I'll tell you, me and a lot of people probably of our generation, I got way behind in any type of retirement savings or investing after the economy crashed in 2008, with the real estate bubble bursting, whatever. I think the Great Recession, I think is what they called it, got laid off from a job, got, really, there was about a 10-year period where I was working all these jobs that had no benefits, no 401ks, no retirement options. I was just basically stringing together part-time, work like that, independent, contractor work. So I got set back. So now, I'm trying to catch up, I guess, if you will. So I guess the question is, what can you say to people maybe in similar situations where they feel like, hey, I'm 40, I'm 50, do I even have a chance of retiring? What can I maybe do to catch up, or what kind of wise decisions can I make?
Yeah, so I think it's important that people realize there's hope, right? Like there's plenty of people that started, like Colonel Sanders started KFC and he was like 67. So it's like after retirement age, right? And it's like a huge franchise that everybody knows worldwide. And so it's like, it doesn't matter how old you are, right? But it matters that number one, that you have that awareness, right? Of, hey, I'm not where I want to be and I need to make some different choices. And once you make that step, then it's what choices do you make? Now, obviously, the $200 scenario we talked about earlier isn't going to apply to someone at 45. So you have to really crunch numbers and say, hey, could I do $500 a month? Could I do 600? What is that number that I could do that I could be consistent with? And to your point, let's say that your employer doesn't offer a 401k or whatever. I would say get a Roth IRA and make sure that you're maxing that out every year so that you're putting away money that's tax-free growth. And obviously, if you have a certain situation where you need the tax benefits of a traditional IRA, talk to your CPA about that. But the idea is make sure that you are consistently putting money into a retirement account, whether it is your employer or outside your employer. And the best way people can do that is by getting some sort of side hustle, right? So, for me, I'd go to yard sales on the weekend, I'd buy stuff and then I'd flip it on Craigslist, or I'd sell it on eBay, right? And so that's something that anybody can do. And I would find a router for $5 and sell it for $50. And this is, the cool thing is it's like, it doesn't take a real special skill. It just takes research, right? And so I would look on Amazon and the one that's selling for the most is $55. I put mine on for $50. It sells the same day. So really, it's just kind of like, that didn't take a lot of time. So find a side hustle that works for you if you don't get enough income in your current job, and then make sure that you have some sort of retirement account if your company does not provide it.
That's great, man. So as we wrap up with Mr. Deacon Hayes, Deacon, do you have any kind of final thoughts or maybe advice or words of wisdom besides what you just shared, just on, retirement planning or anything like that, that you want to share? Like, how can people, maybe what's like the first step for any age? Like what's the first, if you've done nothing, if you're in that 25% of Americans that have zero saved, what can, maybe they're overwhelmed or, they don't know what to do. Where do I start? What would maybe like the first step be?
Yeah, the first thing would be to take a financial snapshot of where you are currently, right? And so, some people call it a budget, right? And I just say this is a financial picture of like, how much money do you have coming in? How much is going out? And then on top of that, I like to have what's called a net worth statement. What are your assets and what are your liabilities? So now you have a real picture for like, what am I working with? What's my income and what's my net worth? And the reason why that's important, when we were paying off our debt, I had a vehicle that was upside down. And I realized, though, my wife had a vehicle that was paid for. So I thought, hey, not only did the budget help, but now the net worth side help, because I'm like, we could sell my upside down car, sell her car, and buy 2 cars with the money from her car. So really taking that financial snapshot, both the budget and the net worth, to kind of see where you are and then paint a picture for where you want to go. And now it's a mathematical equation. How much money do you need to put away to get from where you are to where you want to be?
Sounds great, man. Now, Deacon, I know you do financial coaching and you have so many great resources out there besides your book. Let people know if anyone wants to connect with you. Like, what's the best way to find your book if they want to buy it, or your website? Let people know how to reach you.
Yeah, the best place is wellkeptwallet.com. And then also on social media, it's at wellkeptwallet or at the Deacon Hayes, because there's another Deacon Hayes out there for some reason. So you put the word "the" in there, you might find me.
Well, Deacon, I can certainly share that issue with the name of Jason Brown. Way worse than if there's only one other Deacon Hayes. Consider yourself lucky. There's plenty of Jason Browns everywhere I go. I want to thank once again Mr. Deacon Hayes for joining us, the author of You Can Retire Early. Check out this book if you haven't already. It's a tremendous resource. There's so much to learn in here. Check it out. Deacon, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, this is Jason Brown saying to remember my favorite saying: it's not the amount of money you make, but the margin that matters the most. We'll see you next time.